Shall we begin?
Why would a good God allow suffering to exist? Does God really exist?
Let's begin now.
Why did God command the deaths of so many people in the Bible? Why does God remain so hidden?
Let's begin now.
Welcome to the Third Degree. I am Sule Prince, and I'm here with Dr. Tony Costa. Dr. Costa, we know that Easter is about Jesus Christ. So how did the Easter Bunny get into this picture? What is the meaning of the Easter Bunny and eggs? The bunny having eggs. And how does the Easter hunt also connect to this? Is the word Easter even in the Bible?
Well, let's begin with the last question about whether Easter is in the Bible. The word Easter, the English word Easter, only appears in the King James Version of the Bible in Acts chapter 12, verse 4. That's the only place it appears in. The New King James Version does not have the word Easter there. They've corrected it. The Greek word in the New Testament in Acts 12, verse 4 is Pascha, which, as we've seen, is the Greek word for Passover. But the reason why the King James translators put the word Easter in there is really because of two translators, very famous translators. One was the reformer Martin Luther. When Martin Luther translated the Bible into German in 1522, he used the word Ostern in his New Testament translation, not just in Acts 12, verse 4. He also included it in Luke 2, chapter 2, verse 41, where it says that Joseph and Mary took Jesus to Jerusalem for the Passover. He actually uses the word for for Easter, to celebrate the Easter feast. And then he also uses it in 1 Corinthians 5:7, where Paul talks about Christ our Passover lamb. He refers to Christ there as the Easter lamb there. He uses the German word for Ostern lamb. And William Tyndale in 1525 followed suit. William Tyndale, the English translator in England, also used the word Easter in his translation in English of the New Testament. And so he would refer to Jesus, for example, in 1 Corinthians 5:7. He translated it as Jesus is our Easter lamb, and so forth. Okay. That's how that got into the King James. The King James translators used the translation of Tyndale, and that's how we get the word Easter in our King James Bible. But all current versions use the right word, Passover. And that's because, again, as we've seen, Easter was simply the Christian term for the Passover. Now, in terms of the Easter bunny and Easter eggs and so forth, the idea of the rabbit entering into the picture is something that is outside of Christianity. We know that the hare, or the rabbit, was used in ancient customs and ancient paganism as a sign of fertility. You know, we hear the term breeding like rabbits. And that's because the rabbit is a creature that multiplies very quickly. It is very sexually active. And so in some pagan religions where sexuality was central, which it was in many pagan religions, the rabbit became a symbol of fecundity, that is, of fertility and of fertilization. It became a symbol of heightened sexual activity and so forth. And therefore, during the spring months, what ended up happening was rabbits, of course, hide underground in burrows, at least the wild rabbits do. And therefore, during the spring season, people in Europe would have noticed that rabbits would come out of their burrows. And they would begin this was the height of their breeding season. And so they would associate the rabbit with the spring season. They would associate the rabbit with, again, rising out of the burrows. Yes. So there's that concept of rising again. Rising out of their burrows and bringing about life, fertility. And as we all know, during the springtime, that's when life seems to come back. So the ancient pagans, when they looked at the seasonal changes, they identify the autumn, the fall, as the time of death. The leaves fall off the trees, flowers die, and they associated this with the death of, or the, not so much the death, but the descent of various gods into the underworld. And so the Babylonians believed that Tammuz would descend in the autumn into the underworld. And this would be a time of mourning and grieving. There was actually a ritual where, it's in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel, where they talk about women weeping for Tammuz. Mm-hmm. And that's because he went into the underworld. And when the god descends into the underworld, what happens? Well, things die. Yeah. But then he comes back in the spring. He basically comes back out. And so when he comes back out in the spring, what happens? Well, life is restored again.
And that's in paganism.
Correct. Yeah. And so things spring back. And therefore, the rabbit or the hare was associated with that. Now, when we look at the egg, of course, also represents life, new life. And so an egg is laid by a hen, and new life emerges from that. And so they associated this new season of life with eggs. But what happened was Christians in the East, in Russia and the Ukraine and in the eastern part of Europe, what they did was they adapted the use of eggs to communicate something about the resurrection of Jesus. Now, obviously, they're not worshiping rabbits or eggs or chickens or anything like that. They would take these eggs, and if you notice, they would drench them in red paint. And this red paint refers to the death of Christ, the blood that was spilled. And then, of course, on Easter Sunday, they would celebrate the resurrection by, of course, removing the shell covered in red, and you'd have this beautiful white within the shell representing Christ's righteousness. And that's why the tradition of wearing Easter bonnets and wearing white dress on Easter and so forth represents righteousness and new life in Christ. So the Christians didn't use eggs, obviously, because they were connecting this with paganism. They simply used it as a symbol of Christ's resurrection. Today in the Passover Seder, our Jewish friends, when they celebrate the Passover Seder, there's an egg on the Passover Seder as part of the meal that they have during the Passover to represent hope and new life. Okay. So the idea of the hare or the rabbit and of these eggs is something that is definitely connected to the idea of pagan ideas of fertility. Yes.
But we don't endorse it as Christians.
We do not endorse it as Christians, and we should not endorse it as Christians. Absolutely not. And of course, when it comes to the question, we get asked this question frequently, what about Easter egg hunts? Should children be involved in Easter egg hunts? I think we got to leave that to the conscience of the parents, as long as the understanding is not that this has anything to do with paganism at all. Or even Easter chocolate bunny rabbits or chocolate eggs and so forth. I think we have to make it very clear to them that this has nothing to do with the resurrection of Jesus. You want to have a chocolate in the shape of a bunny? Well, I don't think there's any harm in that, unless the child is thinking that this is what Easter is all about. And considering the fact that we can make chocolate in the shape of anything. So I think it's up to the Christian conscience. I think it's a good thing we keep our kids away from chocolate and candy because it rots their teeth and everything like that. So I think this is an area where we'd have to leave that to the conscience of the parents to do that. But as long as they maintain that this has nothing to do with the resurrection of Jesus. Kids eat candy all year round, and they don't have to wait till this time of the year to have it. So that's where we really find a connection here with the Easter bunnies and the eggs.
Thank you, Dr. Costa.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching this video. If you like what you see, please press the subscribe button right below. And beside that is the bell icon. If you want to receive all of our notifications of everything that we do, press that icon as well. Thank you.